Hi, my name is Jamie Rue, and today I'm going to talk to you about Go Set A Watchman by Harper Lee. More accurately, I am going to talk about the injustice done to Harper Lee by the publishing industry when they decided to publish Go Set A Watchman. For those of you that don't know who Harper Lee is, you have not graduated high school yet, because if you have graduated high school, then you have probably at least seen her book, To Kill a Mockingbird. You've probably watched the movie in class. You might have read it, you might have spark noted it, I don't care what you did, but you have heard of To Kill a Mockingbird, and if you have been living under a rock, then you might not know that Go Set A Watchman, a supposed sequel to Kill a Mockingbird, was released this past summer, and I'm mad about it. I am not going to spoil this book for anyone, don't worry. This is spoiler free. Harper Lee is old. I am not sure exactly how old Harper Lee is, probably over 80. She is old, and she is senile. She is not in her right mind, and so she is in no position to grant her consent for her work to be published. Go Set A Watchman, as far as I know, I'm not totally sure because I'm gonna have to fact check myself later, but from what I remember hearing, it was the original take on To Kill a Mockingbird. It's what she wrote originally. I don't know how many drafts of it she went through before she went to Kill a Mockingbird instead. This book was marketed as a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. It is supposed to be Jean Louise Finch, like, years later as an adult. She's been living in New York. She's coming back to visit Atticus. That is what this book was marketed as. That's not what this book is. This book was bad. There's no other way to put it. This book was bad. I think whoever decided to publish this book found it just sitting in a drawer that hadn't been opened in years in Harper Lee's desk and decided, I'm gonna publish this. They handed it to the publisher, and the publisher just sent it directly to the printer. This book reads as if it had not been touched by an editor, and I'm sure it wasn't, because I cannot imagine that an editor on the face of the planet would have allowed this book to go to print. There were formatting issues, there were words that were repeated, there were things that just blatantly didn't make sense. This read as a To Kill a Mockingbird fan fiction. I am not going to discuss unnecessary sequels right now because that's a whole other topic. I am talking about how immoral it was for them to publish this without Harper Lee's consent, and then even more immoral to publish it without first having an editor look it over and make sure that it wasn't terrible. This reads like an unbaited fan fiction. I cannot stress that enough. For example, when a character is thinking, generally their thoughts are italicized, and generally it's also the start of a new paragraph. Not always, but generally. It's kind of like dialogue, except it's not in quotation marks, it's in italics. But that's not what this book did. What this book does is it will go from third person to suddenly shifting into first person, and then you're sitting there confused for a few seconds until you realize that this is Scout thinking. By the way, her name is not Scout in this novel. She's almost never referred to as Scout. She is referred to as Jean Louise almost all of the time. I cannot tell you how frustrating it was to read with that formatting. It's so distracting to be pulled out of a book by that kind of error. If an editor had looked at it, they would have typeset it correctly. Plain and simple. They would have gotten rid of repeated words, which happened frequently. They would have at least made sure that it was readable. I'm not saying that this was totally unreadable. I finished the book, but there were sections that weren't needed. There were things that could have been cut down. If an editor had taken a look at this, they would have been like, oh, this needs work. This does not take away from Harper Lee as a writer. Harper Lee is still an incredibly talented writer. She's still published To Kill a Mockingbird, but I think that this book, Go Set A Watchman, serves as a reminder to the world about how important it is to have an editor look over your work first. If you're a fan of To Kill a Mockingbird, if you're a person that can read a book, do not go into this book expecting a brilliant sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. Go into this book expecting a draft that was published without the consent of the author. Go into this book expecting to see errors and flaws. Expect to be angry. Expect to be disappointed, and just sometimes expect the book to not make any sense. Expect to be confused. Expect to feel anything but good about reading the book. I almost did not read this book. I felt dirty reading the book because I knew exactly what had been done, and expect to come out of it with the realization that editors and the publishing industry are important. And there's a thought amongst people that editors somehow filter your work, or some kind of ridiculous that they try to change your work. That's not what they try to do. They try to make it so that you can get your point across in the most direct and intelligible way possible. That is the job of an editor. I can't tell you how furious it makes me to know that this was published without the consent of an author. Harper Lee is senile at this point. She could not make the decision for herself. She hadn't published something for years. The only book that Harper Lee ever published was To Kill a Mockingbird, and there's a reason for that. It's because she only wanted to publish To Kill a Mockingbird. And to take that away from her is, first of all, an insult to her. Second of all, is a show of just how cruel the industry is. This was an act of cruelty. There's no other way to put it in my mind. This shouldn't have happened. The fact that it happened doesn't lessen the integrity of the book that she originally wrote, but it lessens the integrity of the publishing industry. I cannot believe that you published this. I'll still read the books that you published, but do not expect me to purchase this book. 1, on the grounds that it's immoral. 2, on the grounds that it's just a badly written book. Actually, scratch that. It's not badly written. It's badly edited. All drafts are bad. That's what editing is for. I think it would be good for everyone to remember that.